I'd like to take this moment now to introduce an individual that I had the pleasure of meeting about 9 years ago. I actually knew him before then, but we had a real opportunity 9 years ago to work together. Dave Helseth is a retired pastor from Englewood Christian Fellowship, and he spent so many years there. But toward the end of his tenure there, he made that facility available for the Extreme Winter Weather Shelter Program, which we were a part of for a few years. And just the pleasure of working with David and to see his passion and his sensitivity toward the issue. It's been a real joy to have that time working with him. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dave Helseth to you.
It is a pleasure to see all of you here this evening. Thank you for coming. This is an important issue that we need to face as a community. And I want it to be a community effort that we look at this and address this. And so we're grateful for having all of you here this evening. To hear this, I'll have a little bit more to say following our presentation this evening. So thanks to Dave Van Hansen and Vineyard for hosting us this evening and the work you've done through Sunrise Outreach. Made this presentation or shared some information about what we were about with the Yakima Association of Churches and Faith Communities in January, and they were all excited and gung-ho, and they said, we want to sponsor this. And we knew Dan was going to be coming and all of that. So I want to thank the Yakima Association of Churches and Faith Communities for sponsoring this event this evening. Ken Jones of Unitarian Universalist is and Cheryl Red of Unity Spiritual Life are the co-chairs of this organization, and several other members are here this evening as well. And thank you for your support in this. So we are here this evening to hear from Dan Bryant of Eugene about what they are doing concerning this element. One approach, one means by which to address homelessness, and we're going to hear about that. And then I'll share a little bit about where we're looking at in terms of Yakima and going with that. So give me a little bit of an introduction to Dan. I've had the privilege of knowing Dan Bryant for a number of years. We go back quite a ways. His dad's a minister, mine is. We're both in the Christian Church Disciples of Christ denomination. Dan's pastor of First Christian Church in Eugene, a building that looks a lot like this, actually, maybe a little bit bigger. If I saw on Facebook correctly, you just celebrated 25 years there as pastor. All right. It's a downtown church, very active and engaged in homeless issues. And if I'm misspeaking, Dan, you can correct me, but they've opened their building to homeless people. Their parking lot has been used for homeless folk over the years. And Dan and First Christian Church were very active in starting Opportunity Village 3 years ago. This last year, if I understand correctly, Dan renegotiated his contract with Eugene First Christian Church to reduce his hours as senior pastor so that he could take on the executive directorship of what is now Square One Villages, Eugene. And so he is traveling around and sharing what is happening with other communities like Yakima who are interested in addressing homelessness with this tiny village idea. Dan, welcome to Yakima.
My text today comes from Dorothy in the Gospel of Oz. So click your heels 3 times and say with me, there's no place like home, there's no place like home, there's no place like home. Indeed, home is where we have connections that matter most to us, like our friends and family. And so here's my family. I know it's a good-looking bunch, but I invite you just to think back a little bit and consider what distinguishes us from the rest of the animal world. What defines our humanity? From our days as cave dwellers to the present, we have built our homes for ourselves on every continent. using whatever material was at hand, creating a place simply to be, where we could seek safety from the elements, where we could sleep, where we could keep our belongings, where we could make our meals, where we could raise our families, where we could make our living. And from the lowlands to the highlands, we have made our abode on this earth, whether in a community of 1,000 or thousands and hundreds of thousands, or in the home of our dreams in the countryside. Maybe not this home, but it does have a good view. Out the window, through the roof, it's a great view wherever you turn. But we have always, said that our home is our castle. The Roman philosopher Cicero wrote, "What more sacred, what more strongly guarded by every holy feeling than one's own home?" Yet of all the animal species, only human beings have no natural home. And so we make a home for ourselves, as we are each able, some more able than others. And to quote Jesus, who said, "Foxes have dens, birds have nests, but only the Son of Man," one interpretation of that means humanity, "has nowhere to lay his head." In other words, as the historical scholar John Dominic Crossan puts it, there is something cosmically unjust in the fact that only human beings can be homeless. So simply put, homelessness is a justice issue. Without adequate housing for our citizens, there is a basic injustice built into the system, which deprives people from their opportunity to seek those unalienable rights penned by Thomas Jefferson into our Declaration of Independence, the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And I would suggest to you that homelessness is perhaps the greatest injustice that we have faced as a nation since Dr. King led those marchers across the Selma Bridge. So imagine what it is like then to live on the streets, to have no place where you can be, no place where you can sleep, no place to prepare your meals, no place to keep your stuff, no place to bathe, to change your clothes, even to keep a toothbrush. Indeed, just having a place for your stuff is one of the biggest problems that the homeless face. And there's often a stigma and a shame that comes with being homeless. But the real shame is that we have made it nearly impossible for the poorest of the poor to live amongst us with any dignity. Meanwhile, instead of providing shelter for the unhoused, we spend our public dollars to put up barriers wherever the unhoused may go, to find relief from living outdoors, from the boulders that we place under bridges, to 2x4s attached to benches, because heaven forbid someone should lie down on a bench in a public park. And that's not to mention the ways in which we make it illegal to be homeless through ordinances that punish people for just being in the community without a place to call home other than that spot by the river or under that bridge or just living on our streets. Places that we are increasingly making off limits. And then we wonder why there are so many homeless people in our public squares. So when we fence out the places where people go to seek out shelter, where do we think that they are going to sleep? They have to sleep somewhere. So in our community in Eugene, we have one shelter bed for every 3 to 4 unhoused individuals in our community. So obviously not near enough, and I suspect that the statistics are probably fairly similar here. And homelessness is not just a problem for the unhoused, because it has an impact on all of us. So consider that more than a third of those living on our streets today are there because of a mental health issue. Would anyone blame the mentally ill for a condition with which they were either born or was the result of a traumatic injury to their psyche? That county jails today are the #1 provider of mental health services in most communities is not an indictment on the mentally ill, it is an indictment on society. So I ask you, who is more guilty? The mentally ill in our jails, or those who created the system with too few alternatives that puts them there? Drug and alcohol addictions, of course, are an issue. very common ailment among many of the homeless, and what I've learned from my work is it's more often than not a survival technique. As one person put it to me, life on the street is pretty crappy. Why wouldn't you choose to take something that makes you feel better, right? But among the medical community, for decades, they have considered addiction not to be the failure of morality or of will, but as ailments requiring treatments for both the good of the individual as well as the good of the community. So why then do we expect addicts to magically quit their addictions before we will provide them with a place to live? Does anyone think that, your addiction will get better by being homeless? And then there are those, of course, with neither addictions nor with mental illness who are homeless simply by the virtue of their poverty and the high cost of housing. HUD released some statistics recently showing that 1 in 4 renters pay half of their income on housing. And among those who earn the federal minimum wage, that's 70% who pay half of their income on housing. That's over 11 million Americans who are at risk of becoming homeless for no other reason than they simply cannot afford their rent. On my way up here yesterday, there was a story on NPR on evictions in this country. There are on average 1 million evictions every year. Most of those for non-payment of rent. Why? Because they don't have the income, because they have other expenses, and because there simply is not enough affordable housing in our country. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that a little bit later. So let's be clear. I can't say this strong enough, but I think many of you know this. The problem is not the homeless. We need to change our thinking. The problem is the lack of shelter for those who cannot provide their own. The problem is the lack of adequate treatment options for those with addictions they cannot control. The problem is an inadequate mental health system to provide for the most vulnerable of our citizens. The problem is dysfunctional families with too few places to go for help, and a dysfunctional system with too few people to provide the assistance needed. So in other words, it's not their problem, it's our problem, it's society's problem. And one of the ironies of homelessness is that it actually costs more to leave someone who is chronically homeless on the streets than it does to provide them housing. A study in 2014 in 3 central Florida counties found they were spending over $31,000 each annually on over 1,500 individuals, whereas the cost to house and provide services to them would just be $10,000. And that study wasn't really anything new, because there was another study several years before that, in 2009, of more than 10,000 homeless individuals in Los Angeles, and they found that they spent, on average, just over $600 a month in supported services when they housed those individuals, but just under $3,000 a month on those individuals when they were unhoused. And even that's not really news. In 2002, there was a study in New York, and they found that they were spending over $40,000 annually on the unhoused who were also mentally ill. So for those who have no other choice than to seek shelter wherever they can, and sometimes banding together with others to create their own little tent village, and then most often in most communities forced to move over and over again, the options just are not very bright. So we need to step up our game. So this is the church that I serve, a very historic building, and I began in 1991. I had absolutely no intention whatsoever of developing a ministry to and with the homeless. But because we are a downtown church, and we just kept seeing so many people coming through our doors, desperate for help, and we began doing little different things. We had a long history. We had a clothing closet that's been in operation for over 60 years. We've always had a heart for helping people in need. But I want to share with you then some of the things that we started doing that really got me involved much deeper. 6 different creative approaches that we are using in our community to try to serve the 1,500 to 2,000 individuals living on the streets. We, like most communities, have a gospel mission. It is the largest provider of emergency shelter in the state of Oregon, with more than 450 beds. It includes a family shelter for women and children. And they do such an excellent job that the community basically decided we're not going to invest any money in building shelters for homeless individuals. And I was part of some of those discussions early on in the 90s. The decision had already been made, but they said, we'll let the mission do that. We'll concentrate on preventing homelessness and on providing shelter for families and people with brain injury and the mentally disabled, and did nothing to invest in our infrastructure to provide more shelters. And meanwhile, the numbers of those who were unhoused mushroomed, and the mission was greatly overwhelmed. And so we began organizing some creative efforts. The year I arrived, we had just started a temporary shelter program for families using churches, where each church would take 1 week or 2 weeks out of the year to house 10 to 12 families. And that runs only during the school year. And when we started it, we said, well, this is just a temporary solution until we create more shelter options. Well, that was 25 years ago. We're still doing it, and it has become the entry point for most families now in our community to come into the shelter system. It's coordinated by St. Vincent de Paul with a little help, a grant from the city to pay some of the staffing costs. Then in 1997, we created the car camping program, an ordinance that was approved by the city council that allows churches, businesses, nonprofits, and others to house up to 6 vehicles. They must be vehicles or RVs on their property. Originally it was 3. We expanded it a couple of years to 6 because it was going so well. And at our church, we have housed more than 140 people in the last 18 years, and the only cost we have paid is for the utilities to provide them some electricity. And there are over 25 sites in the city of Eugene and also in Springfield next door that provide about 60 spaces for individuals and households. And then in 2007, Major Thomas Egan froze to death on the streets of our community in February, just 2 blocks from the mission. And that prompted folks to organize our warming center, very similar to the one you have here. We call it the Egan Warming Center. Uses typically about 6 churches, houses upwards 300, 350 people. Also supported with a small grant from the city to provide a little bit of staffing to organize it, but otherwise run by volunteers. So here's a great story. Thanksgiving, we had a long cold snap. I think it was 6 nights. We should have been open, but we had to close it down on the 6th night because we ran out of volunteers. They were just worn out. The word went out in the community. The next 2 training events that we had the following week, we had 400 new volunteers at each of the 2 training events, including our police chief and his wife, who are now part of the system, part of the volunteers helping out with this program. So it's been very successful, and I have no doubt has saved a number of lives. The latest new thing that we started 2 years ago, we call rest stops. They're legal camps within city limits that allow up to 20 people to camp on a vacant piece of property that is set up by the city. There has to be some group, outside group, that works with the city and the residents of the rest stop. One of the camps is designated as a health site for people who need help with health issues, in particular addiction issues. It's really the only wet shelter that we have in our community at the moment. 3 of the sites are run by another nonprofit called Community Supported Shelters that designed and built what we call Conestogas. Very nice, neat little building, 6 by 10, insulated with this bubble wrap, but with a door that locks. And we went to the city with this and asked to put them in our car camping program. They said, well, it's not a car, and so we were trying to work to redesign the city ordinance to allow it, and then the city attorney said, well, city council has the authority to determine what a vehicle is. So you are looking at a vehicle with square cinder block wheels that's now legal in the city of Eugene. But this particular site is for veterans, and it's actually on the site of the mission, just a little ways away from the main building of the mission. And is so essential, and this is another new insight that I was not aware of, for many of our veterans, going into a mission surrounded by large crowds of people is simply not an option because of PTSD or other issues. And so to have this kind of place where they can have their own safe, secure sleeping area with a door that locks, it just allows them then to get in out of the cold, and it's been very successful. So with all of these programs, still more than 60% of the unhoused in our community still have no shelter on any given night. And to make matters worse, the mission a couple of years ago decided to become a clean and sober site and started drug testing and alcohol testing, and which resulted in more than 100 of their residents being displaced and now out in the community. And I don't fault them for that decision. I understand perfectly the reasons for doing it. It's just created a crisis for our community. So the fifth program then that I mainly want to focus on is what I have been most a part of, Opportunity Village Eugene. And I would like to just show a short little video that does a really good job of describing.
It's a gated community. It's a gated community for the homeless.
It's called Opportunity Village. It's transitional housing for the homeless, and it's unlike almost any other in the country.
They're like cute little miniature houses, and I think it's something that the average person can relate to.
Andrew Heapman is an urban planner recently out of college and author of a book about tent cities. He spearheaded the design of Opportunity Village and calls the miniature houses bungalows.
While it may not be much, just having a small place to call your own is a pretty important thing, no matter how small it is.
It's a heck of a lot better than sleeping under a bridge.
This is Pastor Dan Bryant, senior minister of the First Christian Church in Eugene, Oregon. He's the president of the board at Opportunity Village. He also has individual shelters for the homeless on church property. Conventional development of low-income housing costs on average about $200,000 per unit. They're a little larger, of course, and they have indoor plumbing and electricity. But all of the little houses here, all 30 of them, added together cost less than half of one federally funded unit. And they didn't cost taxpayers a single dime.
We're gonna learn how to share food here, so we have 2 fridges here, 30 people.
The village has a community kitchen where residents can cook their own meals. It may be outdoors, but it's spotless. Individual units don't have electricity, but that's a small problem for people who have been sleeping in dark, shadowy places. People like Robin.
Because what I got now is I got it hooked up, my lights hooked up. So I have lights running off of 18-foot batteries.
Those people that think that this would be a good idea can get a show of hands.
This is another unique aspect to Opportunity Village that organizers say was influenced by the Occupy movement.
And everyone's required to attend a village meeting. And all decisions are made in that village meeting. And so that's where everything's dealt with. And so the whole village, I mean, it's democracy at its most basic level.
This is Catherine. She likes that the residents have a say.
It gives you the chance to have a voice, you don't feel like nobody's listening to you. You feel like you have some control over your life.
There's some well-worn faces here, but there are plenty that look like your neighbors. Tony, for instance, lost her job and then everything else. Now she's employed as a caretaker.
It's my own little place where I can regroup and get my paperwork ready and get ready for work. And we have showers here that we share and wash our clothes here, and I'm able to get to work and look clean and presentable.
Catherine and Ron Griffith moved in here after she lost her job and the roof fell in.
I kept saying it couldn't get any worse, but then it kept getting worse. I tell people at the beginning of April of last year, I had a 3-bedroom home, everything that goes with that. My 2 adult children were living with me, and I had a mother, and we thought everything was good. By the end of May, I had none of that. It was all gone by the end of May.
Now Catherine has a job and she and Ron live in an apartment downtown.
Coming here and things just start falling into place. And now we're successful members of the community.
The village has been such a success that the city extended its lease. The next project will be called Emerald Village. There the bungalows will be twice as big. These will be for the homeless who have a job but don't make enough to rent or own a place of their own. For Religion and Ethics News Weekly, I'm Lucky Severson.
So that is actually about half of the full video that aired on PBS. And I've watched it several times. The first time I noticed that Tony, sitting in the yurt there, I think was watching an American Idol video when she was being interviewed. You notice that? But why not, right? Why did, should folk be able to enjoy some of those other things that we take for granted that they don't get to do? So the mission of our nonprofit is to create a new model of housing that gives the unhoused a place to belong and a new opportunity to start at square one, hence our name, Square One Villages. And I want to spend a little bit of time talking about our work, since this is the project that I think has attracted the most attention nationwide, featured not only on PBS but also MSNBC, CNN's website for the 10 most innovative designs, and even in the London Guardian. We opened in August of 2013 with our first 14 individuals, built the village over the next 9 months with help from the residents themselves, as well as a lot of volunteers from the community. And it's become a very attractive, comfortable place for about 33 to 35 people. The average stay can be anywhere, well, probably our shortest is 3 months, but average is 9, 12 to 15 months. There's no maximum length of stay, but everyone is expected to have a transition plan. They have to write out that plan. They meet with a case manager, not ours, but from another agency, who goes over that with them, helps them figure out what's realistic, what's not, and then we try to provide them the support to realize that plan. So a classic example of this is a young woman who said her goal, dream, was to get her college degree so she could go out and then look for work in her field. And she has been working hard on that for the last 2.5 years, taking classes at Lane Community College, and is well on her way. I think she may be graduating this year. So 50 people have transitioned out since we opened, 2/3 of those into other permanent housing. For the first 2 years we're open, there were only 2 people who got a Section 8 voucher because it was so difficult to get them. Since then, in the last few months, we've been more fortunate, particularly our veterans. Almost all of our veterans now have received vouchers and are able to move out with that assistance. The villagers all give 10 hours of service to the village. 8 of those hours are doing the front gate. Like I said, it's a gated community. That gate is staffed 24/7. You can't get in without checking in at the front gate, and that's really essential to the operation. And not only does the village provide those opportunities for people to start working, for people to go to college, we have had 2 weddings at the village. It's one of the benefits of being an ordained minister, right, that got to preside at those weddings. So all kinds of good things are happening. So just by the numbers, the village has 29 units. It was a little over $200,000 to construct, half of that in cash, half of that in in-kind donations that we received. Our utilities are about $1,200 a month. You amortize our expenses over 5 years, and it comes out to $5 a night per person that we are spending. The villagers themselves pay $1 a night, so our net cost is just $4. We think it's probably one of the most cost-effective shelter programs in the country. And it's working. There was a study, study done by a research group at the University of Oregon that reported the following. The survey they did showed that the surrounding neighbors, 90% of the surrounding neighbors and businesses were very supportive of the program. The people both in the village as well as in the rest stops said that it helped them to gain their self-confidence, it made them feel more independent, gave them a sense of community. More than 70% of the residents indicated that staying at the rest stop and the village was helping them to transition into permanent housing, and their conclusion was that these programs are working, and that was the most important conclusion of their study. We didn't even know they were doing this study until after it was done, and so we were obviously quite pleased with the results. Even our police department, our police department has one complaint. We don't give them enough business. And they never have to come out and see us. In fact, they come by once in a while and have coffee, more than they come out for any other reason. So it's a very, kind of a nice problem to have. Our project director, Andy Heeben, who you saw in the video, did his master's thesis in urban planning on tent villages, and spent a summer living in a couple of different villages, and then wrote a book about his experience, and has quite a bit of detail on Opportunity Village that he added to it. So you can buy it on Amazon. Tent City Urbanism is a great resource. So one of the problems that we have discovered in all of this is helping people to transition out. People were getting their life in order, they were getting jobs, getting back to school, developing income, qualified for disability, whatever, but they could not find an affordable place to live. And when you look at the website of our housing authority, which is the second largest in the state, and maintains 1,000 affordable housing units, provides over 3,000 Section 8 vouchers. They list the wait times on their website. And for a family seeking a 3-bedroom apartment, that wait time is 1 year. For a family seeking 2 or 4 bedrooms, the wait time is 2 to 3 years. But if you are a single individual or a couple without any children, all you need is a single bedroom or a studio, the smallest, most inexpensive apartment there is. The wait time was 5 years. They closed the wait list a few months ago because the list had become so long, it just didn't make any sense to keep the list anymore. So you can't even get on the wait list. So why is that? For a couple like my friends Juan and Rhonda here, that they should have such difficulty in finding a place to live. And by the way, I'll come to that in just a second. So with all of my ministerial training, I decided we needed to do some roofing, and I couldn't find anybody to donate this service, so I got up on the roof and started roofing. And for the first couple of months, we just had tarps over our structures. Well, Juan was watching me, and he decided that I could use some help. I don't know why, but at any rate, so he climbs up on the roof to help me. And it turns out he was a professional roofer. I didn't know that, The resources were right there in the community. And the funny thing is, he went on to finish the roofing in the rest of the building, and it went a lot quicker once I got off the roof. I haven't quite figured out why, but here's the thing. Ron, as I say, qualified for his disability just recently. He has advanced COPD. He's on oxygen pretty much 24/7, has a breathing machine at night. This is the last roof he will ever be on. Or meet my friend Joe. Joe had been in the village for a couple of months when one day I was there, and he walked up all excited and asked if I would like to meet his wife. I said, "Wife? Joe, you have a wife? How did we not know that you have a wife?" Right? Well, it turns out she was terminally ill and lived in a nursing home. And Joe's one request of us was, could we allow her to come and stay at the village so that she could die peacefully in his arms? We could not do that, but we worked with Joe to make it possible for him to spend more time at the nursing home. And indeed, she did die a couple of months after this picture was taken. So why is it people like Joe and his wife, Juan and Rhonda, cannot get a decent, affordable place